You may be sick of seeing these in your mailbox. This is the stack I've received recently, and Montanans have also endured nearly 40,000 broadcast ads from the Senate race in the last 2 weeks alone. Critics say the U.S. Supreme Court's Citizen United decision from 2010 is squarely to blame. That decision effectively opened the gates on election spending, and since then, money in politics has skyrocketed. Montana PBS's Anna Rao sat down with Dr. Travis Ridout, co-director of the ad tracking group Wesleyan Media Project, to discuss the impact of all that money.
Do you think that Citizens United has changed elections quite a bit?
It has. It's just made it really easy to get large sums of money into politics. Prior to that time, the only way to get a bunch of money into politics was through nonprofits who were limited in how much they could spend on politics. They were limited in electioneering. They kind of had to pretend that they weren't telling you to vote for someone, and so they'd say nice things about one candidate, or more generally nasty things about one candidate, but it was all done kind of on the side to make sure that they weren't engaging in what would clearly be electioneering. And so with Citizens United, that was all opened up. You could say vote for so-and-so. We didn't have to worry about any of those kind of making sure we were following the law anymore, because the law had really changed. You could raise as much money as you wanted. You could spend as much money as you wanted.
Does that have to be reported somewhere, though? Is there a way to track that?
With a super PAC, yes. That has to be reported to the Federal Election Commission. But some people don't like that. If I'm a billionaire and I don't want people to know that I'm spending $50 million of my hard-earned money on trying to influence a campaign. There are other avenues, though, that could be spent through or contributed to a 501c nonprofit who do not have to disclose who their donors are.
Those are the dark money groups.
Those are the dark money groups, exactly. Many organizations or people involved in politics might have a super PAC or two, a 501c or two. Sometimes they're donating to each other. You'll see maybe they're using, for one part of the campaign, it might be more advantageous to spend that money through the super PAC. Another part of the campaign will spend the money through the 501c. So you can even have these very vast networks of 50 different legal entities. Many of them might have the same address. There's not really anyone behind them, but they're giving money to each other and spending that money for electioneering.
So kind of funneling it through different businesses to hide where it's coming from.
Exactly, yes. And also with the 501cs, technically I'm not supposed to spend more than half of my money on politics. But if I donate half of my money to another group and then spend the other half on politics, then I guess I'm abiding by the rule of the law in that instance. Of course, that group I'm donating it to is going to spend that money on politics, oftentimes negative political ads.
And you see that going on?
Oh, we see that going on a lot, yes.
Wow. And that's all totally legal?
All totally legal, yes.
What is the practical effect of that for voters at home? What effect does that have on how they experience the election?
So I think for the average voter, they feel inundated by these political messages, especially if you're living in a state with a really competitive Senate race.
I'm John Tester, and I approve this message.
I'm Tim Sheehy, and I approve this message.
Montana has seen a lot of ads. Montana always seems to be in our top 5, if not top 3, in terms of the number of ads, and also is high in terms of spending. And there are a few reasons for that. One is that TV advertising is relatively cheap in Montana. The media markets are small. In fact, Montana has the smallest media market in the country in Glendive. And so these outside groups can come in and spend a lot of money and buy a lot of advertising inventory with that. Montana is also geographically big, so you have to buy ads on a lot of different TV stations in order to reach the entire state. Montana is also unique in some ways in that people are used to driving long distances, and so radio is more of a player in Montana than some other states.
Does it follow that a politician who knows this particular company or this particular industry gave a bunch to their election campaign or their re-election campaign, does it follow that that politician then will do the bidding of said company or corporation, or is that not necessarily a fair connection to make?
It's probably not a fair connection to make in most cases. What we do know is that money buys access, though. If I'm a member of Congress, I know that a company, a business, an industry, a labor union has been very supportive of me in the past, and I want their support in the future. When they come calling and say, hey, we need to talk about this, I say, yes, I have time to schedule with you, definitely. I will talk about that. And ultimately, members of Congress are supposed to listen to all of their constituents. That includes, big business as well. You just hope that that access is equal for me as it is for the big oil company that contributes $2 million, right?
I think that was a big concern when Citizens United passed, is that all of these wealthy donors would have more sway, would have more influence than your everyday American.
Yeah, and there's pretty good research in political science showing that's the case. Politicians are more responsive to the views of the wealthy than the people who are in the middle class or the lower class in our country, and that's lots of good evidence on that in political science, hard to deny.
What do you think all this money is doing to democracy? Do you think it's having an effect on our democracy?
Oh, I think it is, yeah. Even members of Congress complain that they have to spend so much time raising money that they'd rather not be doing. They'd probably rather be back in the district talking to people. Sometimes good policy suffers. Sometimes, Democrats and Republicans secretly would like to compromise on something, but they fear to do so because they might get attacked by $10 million in negative advertising and being a sellout.
Do you think it's polarized politicians more, potentially?
I do believe it has, yeah. Members of Congress are worried about being primaried, by someone further from the left or further from the right who points out that, they were in the mushy middle or they dared compromise with someone from the other party. And so that can have a negative influence and really bring more polarization to Congress. And the more polarization we see in Congress, that can trickle down to voters who align with those parties as well.
What would you do if you could be the decider with elections?
I don't think that all election spending is bad by any means. That's the way that, voters can learn about the candidates. And again, there's pretty good evidence that voters can actually learn truthful things. I can learn from those political ads who's more to the left and who's more to the right, and find someone who aligns with my own views. And so that can be helpful. The flaw I see, again, is in that lack of transparency. If I were king for the day, I would require much more transparency in the process, first and foremost.
Are there loopholes that you see for reporting and transparency?
The real blind spot right now is with digital advertising, with online advertising. There are very few reporting requirements. Some of the major platforms like Meta and Google do have their own requirements, but they could take those away tomorrow if they wanted. And there are a lot of online ads that are being placed on third-party sites. And so honestly, we don't even know exactly how much is being spent on online ads.
Why is it important for people to understand who's spending money and how much is being spent in our elections?
When you know who's spending that money, you know what their motives are in trying to influence you to vote in a particular way. And that allows you to take the message with a big grain of salt. There's research showing that if we know that money is coming from in-state versus out-of-state, for instance, that matters for how voters interpret those messages and how receptive they are to those messages. If you know that message is coming from an environmental group versus an oil company, that's going to influence your thinking as well. I think it also helps with accountability. If we know who's responsible for this message that may be not quite truthful, when we're reporting on that, that might make that group or that candidate decide, I need to be a little less loose with the truth in the future.
It's important to note that because political ads are considered free speech and protected by the First Amendment, local stations cannot refuse to air ads from candidates, even if they are false or inaccurate. However, news organizations do have some discretion when considering ads from outside groups.